Welcome to the Happy Disruptors podcast. If you're a creative thinker with an unconventional approach to your industry, you just might be a happy disruptor. Join your friends at the Great Outdoors Foundation for honest conversations about tackling critical issues like conservation with an uncritical disposition. If you like to smile and get things done, this is the podcast for you. Secretary Nate, we're so happy to have you here today. And really the topic of conversation is the Hypoxia Taskforce, which you are the chair of. Is that correct?
Co-chair. I got to be on, we got a chair on behalf of the states. EPA is the other co-chair, so it's a state-federal collaboration.
Well, can you give us just a brief overview of the Hypoxia Taskforce and the goals outlined in their action plan?
Yeah, and if you'll let me, I brought a few notes because knowing that when I do this, I serve as the co-chair of the Hypoxia Task Force. The other co-chair is the assistant administrator of the Office of Water. So in this case, it's Jessica Kramer with EPA. And so she's the co-chair on behalf of the federal family. I'm the co-chair on behalf of the states. But I always think it's interesting. If you're going to talk Mississippi River Hypoxia Task Force, we should start with some basics, right? Mississippi River Basin. Let me see. Mississippi River main stem, 2,350 miles long from Lake Itasca up in northern Minnesota. Maybe, who's been there? Let's see some hands, right? Yeah, okay, you wade across. If you have children, they fall in inevitably, But 2,350 miles long from the main stem, drains 40% of the continental United States, 31 states drain or some portion drains into the Mississippi, 31 states, 2 Canadian provinces. Huge importance to exports. Something like 60% of our grain exports in the United States go down. I call it a superhighway to international trade. And if you look at the Mississippi River Basin itself, it is something like 92% of the corn, soybean, feed grains that are produced in the United States are in that geography. So it's an ag area, but it's also home to 100 million people. And I think we need to remember that component too. So I always like to set the stage on what's going on in the basin itself. The task force consists of 12 states that are along the main stem of the Mississippi or the Ohio River. And then you've got 5 federal agencies. So, primarily it's EPA, USDA, Department of Interior. And that group, works together and now dates back to, the 90s when this effort around the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, really gets organized. So it's a good long time now that group has been getting together. But that's really the task force in a nutshell. And it's all about, we meet a couple times a year. We've got a coordinating committee that Matt Lechtenberg on our team at the department, he sort of serves as the state lead of that alongside the EPA. And so we're really involved. Iowa's been heavily involved in the leadership of the task force now for many years. Secretary Bill Northey, God rest his soul. Bill, my predecessor, was also co-chair of the task force. So we've got a long history of doing that here in the state of Iowa.
So the Hypoxia Task Force has now been operating for about 3 decades. Yeah. Looking back, what accomplishments stand out the most to you?
Well, I think what I think the game changer, if you will, comes in 2008. And that is when you've got an action plan, Hypoxia action plan that really lays out that states should set out to develop their own nutrient reduction strategies. And I'm going to stress this too, which is if you think about, go back to you had the Clinton administration, Bush administration, Obama administration, Trump, Biden, Trump. This has been something that's been consistent through administrations. I think of who I've sat across the table with Jessica Kramer today, Assistant Administrator for Water, Radhika Fox, who many of us know really well. Radhika in the Biden administration, Dave Ross in the first Trump administration. These are people who come from different political backgrounds, certainly appointees in different administrations, but really committed to this state-led, federally supported effort around working in the basin. And so what I think has been maybe the biggest change is that you look over the history of the task force, and that is that the urgency has increased, the formality of having nutrient reduction strategies in states. I think sometimes we lose the perspective. We think that these things are only happening in Iowa, that we only have nutrient pollution in the state of Iowa, that maybe we only have nitrate challenges in Iowa when it comes to drinking water. Not true, right? And so you look across the basin, you look across the United States, these are challenges, these are things that states are working on. And so I think getting that kind of awareness and then having states formalize their nutrient reduction strategies and then begin implementation, that's the difference, right? It goes from being a conversation where everybody's sort of around the table, but not talking about action. And I will tell you that now when we get together as states, or when the coordinating committee is meeting, it's about what are you experiencing? How do we address the barriers that we're seeing? As we're scaling up, we're finding these things out. And I think that really has changed. The engagement on the part of the states, I think, has been pretty dramatic. I thought this was also worth referencing, and it goes back to sort of the framework for action through that 2008 Hypoxia action plan. So just here are some of the main points. Encourage actions that are voluntary incentive. This is not Iowa. This is across the basin. This is EPA putting this out, right? So this is just setting the stage for what we do in the state of Iowa and other states. Encourage actions that are voluntary, incentive-based, practical, and cost-effective. Utilize existing programs, including existing state, federal regulatory mechanisms. Follow adaptive management, right? Continuous improvement. Identify additional funding needs and sources during the annual agency budget processes, and that's specific to EPA, but it's also the agencies. But as we've talked about many times, how do we continue to leverage those public resources with private sector dollars and get more done? And funding really becomes a big issue, big topic of conversation. Identify opportunities and potential barriers to innovative market-based solutions and provide measurable outcomes. That's the framing that's put around states that go on then and develop their own nutrient reduction strategies. And Iowa was first to complete our science assessment. Iowa State University led that effort. Science assessment tells us that X practice has X nutrient reduction associated with it. Cover crops, for instance, around 30% reduction in phosphorus and nitrogen on an acre that's got cover crops on it. The science tells us that. We did a science assessment first, built a strategy on top of that. We finalized our strategy. We were second in the nation to do that. Everybody's is different, but has this initial kind of framing that makes them similar. So I think the engagement and the urgency is something that has definitely changed.
So let's talk, I'm going to go off script a little bit here.
Imagine. There, I'm done with my notes now. So
let's talk a little bit. You said Iowa was the second one with our Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. Can you give, and I look out and some of you are intimately familiar with this, some are not. So can you just give an overview of what Iowa's nutrient reduction strategy lays out and how that informs what you do and your department?
Yeah, so again, start big picture. So a task force looks at within the Mississippi Basin that we want to shrink the size of the hypoxic zone of the Gulf of Mexico. In order to do that, you're going to address nitrogen and phosphorus loading in your respective states. And there's a broad recognition, again, this has been stated and stated again by the famous, some of you will know the Stoner memo, Nancy Stoner, EPA Office of Water, kind of lays out this idea that the best, most practical way to do that is through state-led, federally supported pieces. But really what you need to look at is following this framework, how do states try to reduce nutrient loss, nutrient pollution into their lakes, rivers, and streams? And so we set out, again, to start with, which is so wise, to start with the science. If you're going to expend public resources, right, we're going to ask the legislature to allocate dollars for this effort. How do you do that with a straight face and say, but when we pay a cost share on cover crops, it has an expected return. And we're not going to go out and invest in things that don't have a return. Mm-hmm. And so you start with that science and then you build on top of that. So what we did is set out the Department of Natural Resources, Iowa State University, and the Department of Ag and Land Stewardship are the three main principles that drove the creation of the strategy, but obviously engaged with stakeholders across the state in the development of this. So it was a broad process where we bring this together and really lay out a strategy that includes, and this is something else I'm really proud of, is that it is not just an ag nutrient reduction strategy. It is one that looks holistically. Ag and urban, point and non-point. So we have to address things like nutrient loss from the ag landscape. We need to look at nutrient loss through stormwater and urban landscape, and we also need to look at point source nutrient loading through wastewater system improvements in industry. And it's something that put that all together. And I think that was very wise for those. Can't claim credit for that. That comes before me. But, you know, there were people who were very wise about putting those things together in a way that we don't point fingers at each other and say, well, it's your issue or it's their issue. It's our issue, and it has to be dealt with together. And so lays that out. On the ag side of things, it lays out a menu of practices, as I mentioned, that strategy, that science assessment says, you know, nitrate-reducing wetlands, buffers, you know, traditional practices like terraces, cover crops, no-till, strip-till, you name it. A very robust list of practices that have a nitrate reduction and a phosphorus reduction as well. And so that's the framing around this. And sets out a goal of reducing our nutrient loss by 45% for both pollutants. I mean, so that's not an insignificant number. It's not a 425%. It's a 45% reduction, and then assigns, you know, responsibility, if you will, to the point source and the non-point source side of things. I would encourage anybody. Look, this is an open book. The final strategy was the first strategy was finalized in 2013. We have updated it throughout the years. The most recent significant update came in 2025, but you can go back on the Iowa State University Nutrient Reduction Strategy website. You can see the old documents. You can see the progression. Nothing's hidden there. You can go back and read it all, in addition to the reports that we had issued previously, and now a new set of dashboards that you can look at in terms of where are we at in terms of measuring progress or challenges. But you can get that in a very user-friendly way, but also dig into the details if you'd like.
Okay. We'll come back to the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. I think what's interesting, though, is that every state has their own reduction strategy, and multi-state collaboration is obviously incredibly complex. We somewhat have some of the same issues, but each environment is slightly different. What lessons have been learned about building alignment across regions, agencies, sectors? What have you learned there?
Well, again, my job is, if you put it in the context of the task force, is really to give voice to the states. And so one of the key premises, and again, it's been restated time and time again by our federal counterparts, saying that the best way to achieve the goals that we want to see here, actual reductions that last throughout time, is to do that with, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach from the federal government. It is state-led, federally supported. And so I think what we have to acknowledge is that things are different in different states, right? That's just a basic concept. And yet there's so much, and I suppose you could make an argument then, well, if that's true, then everybody should just break apart, do your own thing, and you're on your own, right? No, far from it. In fact, there's so much value in that framing, again, that EPA established across, because we do have diverse states, red and blue, up in the watershed, down in the watershed, different agriculture. Some state, you know, one thing that we don't deal with is really a significant population center. For instance, like, you know, we don't have a St. Louis or Chicago in the state of Iowa, and the implications of that, right? States are different, and yet there are things that we can do together and things we can learn. And I always figure that, you know, there's a lot that makes states different, but there's a lot that makes it similar, and we're wrestling with the same challenges. And so I think pull out of that complexity, if you will, the things that really are similar, and then you can attack those together. Those sort of rise to the surface, then you say, wow, that's a big deal if that's cutting across the whole region. And then, you know, really working with the federal family to try to address those things. Common issues, funding, probably not a surprise to folks in this room, is funding is a real challenge, and everybody's got different resources at their disposal in different states, but I think that becomes one of the big things, is as you begin to implement and you start to achieve some scale and you want to even go further, then you really are resource hungry.
Yeah, so let's talk about scale, right? I mean, you would think that the Hypoxia Task Force would help lay the foundation for, once you have pilot projects that are working and doing well, that maybe there would be an emphasis on putting more resources among things that can scale at a high level. Have you seen that? Are we starting to see that? Are we starting to see, after a decade or more, the ability to scale up?
Yeah, I mean, that becomes the whole, frankly, I mean, I can remember back, even, I guess you'd have to say it was when Secretary Northey was co-chairing and I was serving as deputy secretary, a lot of that conversation initially was around, hey, states need to get organized, they need to get, they need to get their strategies finalized, and, how do they get organized around that? And a lot of discussion around those types of things, which has now turned into how do you scale up?
Right.
And that's been a progression, certainly that I've seen even in just my time, either by being around him or in my time serving as the actual chair. I would say that one of the key components that we have to remember is it's about trying to leverage those existing programs that were referenced in those principles of the task force. Being we ought to leverage existing programs. NRCS is significant conservation dollars available, and how do we take maybe the way that things have been done or some of the emphasis that's been given on certain practices and start to point that towards more water quality practices, and that's just been a progression over time. So I'd say that's still in progress, and we're seeing some movement in the right ways and some opportunities to leverage those dollars better. But I'd say that's been a slower process maybe than what we would initially have thought. But how do we continue to bring NRCS, and by the way, NRCS is a fantastic partner. They've got a lot on their plate, a lot of expectations of them by Farm Bill, but how do we continue to work so that water quality improvements become one of their key initiatives? And so that's one way, is how do you leverage the other resources? EPA is actually now stepped up and for the first time started a few years ago actually helping to fund, in our case, and again, this is appreciated because it allowed us to fund some things that we couldn't otherwise do, but we're talking maybe them providing a couple of $1 million over the course of several years, and Department of Ag alone is receiving $50 million a year in state resources for the nutrient reduction strategy and conservation work. So it wasn't game-changing funding, but what we were able to do is fund some pilots or some specific things that maybe we didn't have other dollars that we could allocate for them. And so I think that's been creative. But I will say other states use it for, whatever their particular special need was, they were able to do that. So have they been big dollars that have come through EPA? No, but there have been some dollars, and it's really about trying to leverage these other resources.
So we're going to double click on the funding before we go on a little bit, because I think this is something that we're hearing all over the country. There's retrenchment on the state, federal side. There's tax issues. We're in a more competitive environment with the economy. How are you with the task force and then leading the Department of Ag trying to leverage more funds to Iowa? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, it's, for us, what I have advocated for now since 2018, and that is that I'm somewhat agnostic on the source of funding, provided that it is long-term and it is dedicated. Again, having been around, again, serving 5 years, as deputy secretary during a time where we didn't have a lot of funding specific to water quality, but it was growing, but it was coming on an annualized basis. And, it's hard to sign a 5-year contract with somebody when you don't know what next year's budget is, right? 2018 changes that. We have, for the first time, long-term dedicated funding. It ramps up, it hits full stream in 2022. And then just this past session, we, again, had a historic allocation of dollars to programs that are working, infrastructure and working upstream. So, in the state of Iowa, it's really been night and day from 2013 to today in terms of we have the ability to do things as a state without having to rely on a federal partner to do it. If we like a project, we want to pilot something, we want to try something, we don't need to wait and match it with a federal dollar. We can go and do those things. And so we're in a good spot because of that we just a few years ago, we couldn't have said that was the case. So I'm always looking at how do we take those state dollars, and whether it's the Finance Authority, the DNR, or the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, how are we best deploying those resources for the maximum return on investment? How are we then being competitive with USDA, NRCS dollars, or RCPPs, those types of things that we can compete for? Or how can we work with our federal partners to best leverage those dollars that come through EQIP and other things to get that maximum return that we're looking for? And then always pursuing partnerships, private sector partnerships, as you and I have talked about so many times, is how can we add in these additional partnerships and these additional private sector dollars to leverage those public resources even further. And of course, we're always looking for new partners there.
Yeah. So let's go back to the Hypoxia Task Force. How has the conversation around nutrient reduction and water quality evolved since that task force was first created?
Yeah, well, again, I think it's an urgency. The report that just came out, measuring again, there had been an interim goal that was set at 20% reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus loading in the Mississippi River. You report it this year. It was a 2025 goal, but the reporting comes a year later, so it just got announced, the results here early this month. 28% reduction in nitrate in the Mississippi River, but an increase of 13% in phosphorus, which is the exact flip of what's happening in the state of Iowa, right? We've nearly achieved our phosphorus reduction goals while nitrate continues to be the sticking point for us. Again, we're just focused on that now since 2013. So I think that that shows some progress, but it also reminds us that we've got a lot of work to do, and it's creating some questions. What's happening? I would say that maybe the other piece that has grown in importance is we got to scale up, we got to go faster, we got to get more funding into this system and all those types of things, more partners. But then there's these research questions. What's happening? What's going on? What's going on? Why is phosphorus so challenging in the basin? Are there legacy nutrients? What's the lag time that you see between implementation of a practice, things that work, there's a reduction, but why is it not showing up in the water? And so I think that the research component maybe has been one of those things that's changed or been added into. Recognition of the complexity, recognition that we're making some progress in some places, not making progress in other places. How do you address that? What's the reaction to that? So I would say that's been another one of those changes, if you will, that's come in that discussion.
Yeah, that report was interesting. It raised a lot of questions with people that we talk about. Why do you think, I'm putting you on the spot here, why do you think that we've had that sort of flip here in Iowa where we're more successful in phosphorus but still haven't necessarily moved the needle where we need to on nitrogen? Well,
I do think it's a timing issue, which again, you go back, the history on soil conservation goes back to the Dust Bowl era, of last century, and the federal government gets involved in the Soil Conservation Service, gets involved in conservation districts, soil conservation districts, now soil and water conservation districts in the state of Iowa, are celebrating 90 years, since creation, those types of things. So, this has been happening in the state of Iowa. Terraces, windbreaks, grass waterways, traditional practices. We've had a lot of experience with it. State of Iowa in 1972 becomes the first state in the country to allocate state resources for soil conservation, right? So we start putting state money into this and building a good system and approach to do that. That has resulted in a lot of conservation getting done on the landscape. Phosphorus in soil. Now I know somebody's going to argue with me on this or point out, where I'm an exception, but we generally say soil and phosphorus, water and nitrates move together. If you're keeping soil in place, then you're preventing phosphorus. So I think what it shows is a focus, a strategy, funding, coordinated efforts, and time pays dividends. How do you take that then and apply that to water quality, which frankly in the state of Iowa, we've had a long history of trying to get rid of water as fast as we can, and what we need to do is address that by slowing it down, by denitrifying, by putting different practices in place. That can be accomplished through management practices like no-till, strip-till cover crops, nutrient management, but it also can be done through edge-of-field practices, structures that we have to go out and build, saturated buffers, nitrate-reducing wetlands. And again, this isn't happening as fast as anybody wants it to, me included, and the hundreds of folks who work directly with us and the thousands of people implementing practices. Believe you me, we know that. But it does take some time to build this out. So, I think those are things that we have to address. We have to acknowledge is a lot of history with the one side of the equation, less with the other. Need to really focus on scaling up.
So we've already talked about funding a little bit. What are some of the other barriers that are preventing us from accelerating that pace?
I think on the ag landscape, Cost generally, and I don't care if you're talking about, wastewater. We've got great progress on the way. I don't usually talk about that. It's the DNR's lane, but I should give voice to that. There's been a lot of work that's done on assessments of wastewater treatment. People do have an impact in that regard too in our water, and we have to understand that as well. But wastewater system upgrades, and we're making great progress there as well. Look, profitability in agriculture is a challenge, and let's be clear about that. We're in a situation where profitability now for 3 years in a row, where you've got the value of a crop exceeds the cost. The value of the cost of growing the crop exceeds the value of the crop in the market, and that's not sustainable. So it's not just that prices aren't where we need them to be, and actually we're going to get it's out right now. Got a crop report I didn't look at before I walked up here, but we've got prices aren't where we need them to be, and input prices are higher than we need them to be, and there's policy uncertainty in the middle. And that creates challenges. That has to be acknowledged. How can you expect farmers to be making investments in any fashion in their operations if you, let alone just staying in business, if you don't acknowledge that first? So I think profitability is a complexity. And we just simply have to reach more folks, give people more experience. They need to learn. People learn in different ways. I think farmer-to-farmer information, field days, those types of things are critically important. And then showing the value. What's it mean to my operation? What's it mean to the economics of my operation to incorporate cover crops or no-till or strip-till? There's just a lot of work, a lot of information that needs to be passed through to the farm community, and we need more trusted advisors working with farmers to accomplish that. So, I just think that's one range of issues. And then the other is we've had a real challenge. Nitrate-reducing wetlands are that's a great practice, and it factors heavily into Iowa's nutrient reduction strategy and how we intend to achieve our goals. These are constructed wetlands. You've got a very small pool, a few acres that can treat hundreds or maybe thousands of acres of farm ground that denitrify as the water moves through these wetlands, up to 90% reduction in nitrogen. And you don't have to model that. You monitor at the top of the wetland, you monitor at the bottom. It's a simple math equation, and you know what your reduction was. Those are costly, they take time, and what you would ideally like to do is put those in the place on the landscape where you've got the maximum return on your investment, meaning you're catching water most of the year, you've got the right size of the pool in the right place. And we ran into some challenges from the Army Corps of Engineers around permitting and potentially requiring us to do stream bank mitigation for the streams that we were impacting in the construction of these wetlands. And I don't mind telling you that we've been working on that for years to resolve that. It threw us, we had to change how we knew that there were some sites we couldn't work in because they were likely going to trigger this exorbitant cost, doubling the cost of constructing these wetlands in order to do this. And we set out to fight this with many partners I know in the room, trying to move the needle in this way. And we did have a breakthrough in that regard. And I appreciate the Corps, I appreciate EPA, the work that's been done to try to move us to where, yes, in fact, we can build these and we don't have to mitigate for the stream disruption. And so things like that. That was a couple years where we really couldn't build where we would have liked to. We kept building wetlands, but not exactly where we would like to. That's an example of where we sort of said, hey, it's one thing if you're building 2 of these a year. Last year alone, we put out for bid 26 wetlands. And we're not quite happy with that even. We think we can be doing more. So when you're talking 26 or 30 versus 2 a year, this is a problem. And it's not a problem until you are operating at that kind of scale, and then we had to deal with that barrier. So there are some things like that just as an example of things that we had to wrestle with. Streamlining USDA programs and how farmers interact with those programs, I think, is another barrier potentially. How do federal programs, state programs, and private programs kind of all layer together? And we can do better there too. I think there's some maybe confusion, but a huge opportunity to work together there.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes...
Sorry, that was long.
No, but that's exactly...
That's the kind of things we're thinking about. Right?
And that's the kind of things that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But it's almost a blessing to come up against those challenges because recently, until recently, we didn't have that scale.
Right.
right? So can we talk a little bit about the batch and build concept and how it's being adopted by other states and how that is helping to get to our next set of challenges that we have to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, it's like we were talking about earlier. What the mindset, of course, is, why are we continually running into these barriers? And it's like, well, we're doing things that have never been done before at a scale that's never been done before. Great job. Let's go. And I want to give credit to my team. Susan Kozak, who many of you know, leads a fantastic team on our soil and water division. And that team I have watched progress from, really having to get their arms around what it means to try to work at this scale and to work to have to, it seems like we're constantly slamming into the next challenge because again, we're doing things that nobody else is doing. And then of course other states are like, well, how'd you do that? And and we're happy to share. It's like we can just as well share our pain, and hey, have your own challenges that you need to work through. But I mean, that's a mindset that you got to embrace. And I think our team has done that incredibly well. It's like, well, what next? What additional thing can we can we deal with? So, I mean, those the batch and build is a good example of where you take, here we're talking about saturated buffers and bioreactors specifically, but I think you can go beyond that. But we're looking at, hey, we could find a landowner who's willing to work with us. You maybe have 1 or 2 outlets that you're going to work on, and the traditional approach would be, well, let's get you to apply for a cost share. We'll take some time to approve that. We'll design that. We'll get back to you. Now go find a contractor. They got to do it just right. They got to know what they're doing. You got, okay, now build that, pay for it, and then submit for reimbursement, right? Long process. That's the normal process, right? And what we get out of that? We got a couple of practices. And then we're going to turn around and try to do that thousands of times across the state of Iowa. Okay, well, obviously that's a challenge. There's a better way to do that. But you got to get experience first. You got to build a few of them and figure out what's going on. But that then morphed into, wait, there's got to be a better way. And so the concept of let's put these together in a group, make it easy for a landowner to say, yes, I'm interested, sign me up. The rest of the work, not simple by any means, the rest of the work happens in the background. Find those outlets, design them, and group them together. Contract, put it out for bid with one contractor, build 15, 25, 50 at a time. You're gaining efficiencies. The contractors love it because then they're able to deploy, mobilize, get into an area, and it's a heck of a lot easier for them and more worth their while. And I think that's the other thing is you got to have land improvement contractors that are willing to bid on those projects and to make it somewhat competitive. So that's an example of where we started down that path, and a good example of through the task force, then that model or that concept was shared with other states, and now you've got multiple states that are using it. And I don't mind telling you that now we're looking at, okay, we've got a pilot that we're doing around cattle and conservation. How do we take cropland that really could be, probably has a better use, not as crop ground, but seeded down to grass. We know we've got the smallest cow herd since the 1950s, so we've got the convergence of a few things here. We need better environmental outcomes. There's a higher and better use for some of those acres. Let's get it under grass. Let's get pasture. Let's get crop rotations, cover crops, hay ground, build some fence, get access to some water. Well, you know what? I think we could probably batch some of those projects together as well. And so now we're starting to apply that across the whole landscape of, well, gee, what else can we group and bid and make it easier for farmers and landowners to say yes on the front end and gain efficiency in the process?
I was recently at a gathering of states and private funders, and they were talking about how do you do public-private partnerships at the state level to advance nature-based solutions. And the batch and build concept came up, and on the West Coast using it for fire prevention.
Right.
And then on the East Coast using it for coastline. So the delivery mechanism certainly, while we piloted it for water quality, certainly has multiple uses. So it's exciting to see what could happen.
100%. And of course, I should mention, then it's like, well, then we're trying to extend. How do we then, work with outside partners to say, hey, you find the sites, you put a group together, you can, and by the way, you serve as the fiscal agent for this, and that makes it then we're writing one check. All those. It's like we're trying to gain efficiencies wherever we can in that process. So I appreciate, thanks for pulling the thread through. It actually is that public-private partnership piece that's, look, I've believed this since the beginning, which is you kind of think of where's the center of gravity on some of these projects, and it's like, look, for some reasons, for obvious reasons, maybe you start with it being a wholly in government, it's got to be led by our team, in-house for us, and then it kind of can move, and the center of gravity starts to move outside of the walls of the department in a way that we can work with partners and private sector, and it becomes a force multiplier for us, and it's actually more efficient and less costly for us to do those things with private partners. We are looking to do that in nearly every aspect. I mean, there are some things that only the government should do or can do or does better, but there are some things that we shouldn't even be involved in and that the private sector can do better, and we're always trying to figure those best arrangements out and looking for partners. Over 350 different partners have engaged in actual conservation work with us in the state of Iowa. I think it's remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have a room full of people from, NGOs and investors and things like that. What can they do, or what can we all do to help accelerate that pace?
Well, look, you've all got respective spheres of influence, right? Where you can bring focus to this, bring attention to this, bring in additional resources. Look, there's just simply a network that we can't access that I can't, or our team doesn't have access to, but you all do. And I think to try to encourage this notion of let's take action together. And I think by now, a few years ago when we were still trying to figure out, I can remember some of our first conversations like, hey, how do we do some of these things together? How do we even talk about that? Can we talk about these? Yes, absolutely we can. And then it quickly shifts from, well, let's talk about these things. Let's go do things together. And I think that's what I'm most proud of is we're positioned in a way that the legislature has been very supportive and has given us a broad mandate. We can work on things that are included in the nutrient reduction strategy. That's about the only guardrails that we have. Other than, there are some arrangements that we can't make, but we have a lot of flexibility to be able to engage. And I think I've told Hannah how many times, keep asking us for things or to do things together, make us finally say no, because we've said, nope, that's too far, right? Or here's how we could do that instead of that way. So, we mean what we say. We want to work with people and get things done, and we are very interested in forming new partnerships and creating new incentives and just broadening our ability to get work done in the landscape. So that's what I would ask. Have a bias towards action. How do we do things together? Encourage you to put real resources and do things in partnership. My other counsel to folks is, and I say this a lot, whether I'm meeting with maybe sustainability leads or with companies or NGOs who are looking to get into the space, is, hey, it matters who you show up with. Farmers, especially the farm landscape, the ag landscape is, it's a different conversation when somebody says, hey, I have an idea about how you should be doing things, versus how can we work with you? How can we work alongside you? What do you think about, hey, we're showing up with a farm group, or we're showing up with farmers in a way that's collaborative, as opposed to saying, hey, we're here to help you, and you didn't even know that we existed or that you needed our help, but we're here anyway. That's a very different conversation. So I've been saying, coaching a lot of folks, it does matter who you show up with, and more partners are better.
So we've talked about how the Hypoxia Taskforce and some of the goals have shifted or changed, or as they've been accomplished, or as you've built things. As climate pressure starts to intensify, how do you anticipate priorities shifting over the next decade?
I would say that's one of those broader, to start big and zoom into Iowa. So if you look across the Mississippi River, the basin, and you look at what's happening in the Gulf, these are big questions, right, that need a significant amount of research. And so that's, again, where our land grant institutions across the basin are looking at some of these questions of what's happening as water is coming from north to south, and how's it processing, or how's weather affecting contributions along the basin. And so, those are some big questions that are definitely being talked about. In Iowa, we look and all we have to do is look at the last couple of years to know that we have gone from several years of extreme deep drought, frankly, that we're still working our way out of in very northwest Iowa and parts of north central Iowa, followed by a couple of years of significant rain in some places, right? So just in the last 5 years, we've seen a dramatic shift in extremes, and it shows you, I think that's maybe the thing that we're seeing, and we've got 150 plus years of climate data at the Department of Ag. State climatologist Dr. Justin Glisson tracks these things really closely, provides us a lot of good information. I think we're seeing more extreme events, and I think we're seeing larger rain events in the shoulder seasons. You know, for us, of course, that comes at times when we don't have crops actively growing, or we don't have the cover that we would otherwise have during the growing season. And I think we need to watch very closely what's happening with temperature. You know, I think last year's a good example of we had a warmer fall. And so when you're looking at fall applied fertilizer or manure applications in the fall, you've got warmer soil temps. Those are things we have to think about. You got natural nitrogen cycling in our landscape because we have high organic matter through the winter months when it's warmer. I mean, these are realities that we have to think about. Now, what's the trend line over time? Those are open questions, but I think we have to continue to think about how do we deal with extremes, and how do we better protect our soil and keep our nutrients in place, which is good environmentally and it's good economically for farmers as well. So I mean, I think those are the realities that we've got to be thinking about. How do you do it? And I think you and I have joked about this in the past, and I'm sure this has happened to many of you in the room too, which is somebody comes up to you and says, all you got to do is, right, this one thing. I wish it were that simple. Gee, wouldn't it be nice if every complex challenge that we ever face in our lives or professional lives had one very simple solution? And it doesn't. And I think that's where in this regard, we have to really think about management practices in fields, cover crops, tillage practices, those types of things. But also that's where those infrastructure, that's where and it's everything. When I say infrastructure, I mean everything from building wetlands on the landscape, saturated buffers, and I also am talking about water treatment as well. And I think we have to recognize that those are pieces that we have to work on together in a paired way. Let's work on preventing nutrients from entering our lakes, rivers, and streams. Let's make sure we've got treatment capacity to be able to handle the spikes and those types of things, and growing populations on the other end of it. Not one or the other, never one or the other. It is both, and it has to be.
So when you look at the 2040 goals outlined in the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, what has to happen to accomplish those goals?
Yeah, well, as I think somebody put it in an event that we were at together last night, we know what to do. We know what to do. And what I mean by that is we know the practices that work. There are questions about, again, you go back to the big scale, what's happening with phosphorus, why aren't we seeing the response maybe that we expect to see when it comes to the basin contribution down at the Gulf. But should that stop? So while we figure that out and while we think about those things, should that stop us from doing the things that we know need to be done to reduce phosphorus loss? Absolutely not. And I think that's the point that I continue to look at. Is we know what to do. We know the practices that work. We have, and I believe in, and I think the way to have lasting change on our landscape that has been proven now by our experience around soil erosion prevention is use the practices that make sense in a particular farm field. And if you do that the right way, those things are going to stay in place. Mm-hmm. It won't be because the government told you to and then changed their mind, and now you've got this adversarial relationship where I'm just waiting for the next plan to come down from on high from somewhere else. But that work, we need to do it. We just got to do more of it. I mean, that's the thing we are exclusively thinking about at the department is we know the practices that we need, that we can go out and implement. We're seeing some success, and we're seeing demand for things like cover crops. How do we go to the next level? We've gone from a few thousand acres of cover crops before the nutrient reduction strategy, 4 million acres. Today, we need to be at 8. How do we go from 4 to 8? And those are the types of things. So it's funding, it's partners, it's market drivers, it's trying to monetize these outcomes. I mean, it's not one thing, it is many things. It's education, it's creating businesses around getting cover crops seeded easier, make turnkey, batch and build, if you will, kind of concepts. So it's a range of things that we do, and that's just one practice, and we need to be doing that across the landscape on wetlands, saturated buffers, tillage, nutrient management, and the like. we just have to do a lot more of it.
So one of the conversations I know we've had in conjunction with others is, and you've referenced this a couple times, that ultimately the goal is that conservation becomes part of the bottom line, right? The bottom line at all levels. And we've had some success with, direct payments to farmers for some of those outcomes, some of those investments. But we hear from philanthropy, there needs to be an exit ramp for philanthropy. We hear, for the government, there needs to be some sort of exit ramp there. What is missing from our current initiatives to get to that point where the market is actually supporting conservation?
Well, it's challenging because a market driver means somebody's paying. Right. Somebody pays, and in a perfect world, what you say is that has got equitable distribution across the supply chain, right? Well, does it work that way? I mean, I think that's the challenge, right? Is if retailer X, makes a requirement that gets pushed to their supplier, that gets pushed to their supplier, that gets pushed to the farmer, farmer doesn't have the ability to push demands onto their input suppliers, really. So here you got a farmer in the middle, and that's one thing I was always worried about with this. And I just think we have to be very wise about how do we make sure that there is some equity in this, and that farmers are getting paid. Really, what they're getting paid for is their information, right? If they're doing a practice and they're going to validate it and they're going to get paid for the outcome, like, we need to make sure that that's respected. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's where we need to get to, and of course that's been slower maybe developing than what we would think. I think the affordability challenge in this country right now is got people really considering just going out and adding increasing what consumers are paying for products and then passing that down through is not going to work in this environment. So I mean, I think that's a tough one to figure out, but one that we need to that will develop. I believe it will develop over time. We have to have market drivers that take hold in a way that works. The other is managing information, and I think farmers are very protective of their information, and one, we need to make it easy for them to capture the information that they need and calculate these outcomes, but at the same time we need to allow them to protect what is theirs, and that is their information. And so I think there's some pieces around that are going to have to be talked about. Really what I'm telling you is the challenge is not how do we get there, but I mean, I think those are the big pieces, and there's policy in there that's probably going to have to be addressed. I will tell you that in the midst of all that, what we continue to think about is there are still a lot of landowners and farmers that still need a first experience or need an incentive to get going or to try something for the first time. That is still, there's still ample opportunity for that. So I think we're a long ways from saying, hey, we've crossed the threshold and now it has to, so that's one we're going to continue, I think, to focus on the types of incentives that have worked to date, but always be looking for what's potentially next. The other is, I think ag retail and cooperatives have a tremendous opportunity here, and we've seen, some of our great ag retail partners looking at and have included conservation agronomists into their operations. I love the concept. I'm going to say tongue-in-cheek that I would love it if the moniker conservation agronomist didn't exist, because it was just agronomists that are dealing with these things. But that's how you get there, is you really start to think about what's the business model around ag retail that starts to move us towards incentivizing and selling services that actually help get these things done. And I love this concept of the conservation agronomist. We're putting some resources into that, private sector is, and I think that's one of those, again, how do you unlock that? How do you continue to develop that? And now we've got a couple of years of experience in learning a lot in that regard. Yeah,
I think the conservation agronomist is one of the more exciting ones from our perspective, because it not only starts to hopefully, the bet is that it'll create that market driver, but in addition to that, it also helps you with that education piece. How do you go from the early adopters, and how do we start to tip that needle to where we need to be on cover crops, edge of field practices, nutrient management, all of that it seems to be a trusted advisor, a trusted partner there. Do you see the same thing?
Well, yeah, and look, these are not, I was with a group, that's been involved in bringing cover crops into an area, and they were just sharing about some of their experiences, and they finally had boiled it down to, don't even buy the seed if you don't know how you're going to terminate it in the spring. Okay, like, and the concept being like, don't just jump in and then figure, because the worst thing you'd want is plant it in the fall, show up in the co-op, the office, talking to your agronomist in April and go, now what?
Right.
That's a bad day. And those things have happened. And so I think just the whole idea that there's a learning curve on these things. How do you adapt? There's an equipment cost that goes along with converting to some of these systems. Like, who's advising you? Who's helping you through that process? So I mean, I think we need to have a recognition that there's a learning curve here, and that trusted advisors can help. By the way, there are this whole concept of calling on or reaching out to people to say yes to conservation. For some, it's an agronomist. For some, it'll be your farm manager. For some, it will be Ducks Unlimited or Pheasants Forever knocking on the door. For some, it's a soil commissioner at a conversation, with it varies. It's your seed dealer. It's your banker. I mean, it's a neighbor. It's a watershed coordinator. I mean, why do we think that talking to people about conservation is any different than any other product that we buy or that we think about? I mean, we all have a different way that we want to be approached about all kinds of things, that we purchase or services that we acquire in our lives. Why do we think that farmers or landowners are any different? That, there's just a one approach. You walk into the county conservation office and everything unlocks from there. Well, for a lot of people, that's exactly what would work, but not for everybody. And we got to recognize that and then engage partners. And I had a great one of our project leads. I said, how do you have a conversation? And she said, what I start with, and this is in the cattle space. What I start with is, what's your legacy? Well, that's an interesting conversation. How do you view your legacy? And that unlocks a lot of times a conversation around, what do you want to leave? How do you view yourself in this generational context of a farm operation? And I was a little surprised that was her lead in, but it has worked, and I think it gets people thinking bigger picture. But that's just one example of maybe not the first conversation you thought somebody might want to have or would have that might unlock that next decision. But I think we need to be very smart about those things.
Maybe we all need to have more conversations like that.
I think we do. Well, I mean, look, it is the concept of, I believe, we are responsible for leaving things better than we found them. And you can apply that to land that you're responsible for or the position that you're in today. I think that's something that's inherent in the responsibility. And so it's like, well, how can you do that in big and small ways in your life and in your professional world, and certainly for our farmers?
All right, so going off of that, you look ahead the next 30 years. What gives you the greatest sense of optimism?
Yeah, well, it is based on this idea that again, caveat, I get accused of all kinds of things, which is fine. It comes with the territory. I'm not saying that we're done. I've said many times there's no finish line in the work that we're doing, and what I mean by that is that when we can always do more. Whatever goal that we've established out there, if we achieve it, we should look at the next horizon, and we should always think about that. So hear me clearly when I say this. There is no finish line, meaning we can always do more. But I simply cannot look at this situation and say that it's all going badly or all wrong. There's too much evidence that we're moving in the right direction. And I think anytime you're in a situation where it's like we're past trying to, and believe me, I got a little experience with this. When the nutrient reduction strategy was first implemented, 2013, I started as deputy secretary. I know for a fact, Secretary Northey and I traveled to the state separately, talking to groups, and the presentation or the speech was, we have a strategy, here's what's in it. And that was the first couple of years. And now we're talking not about what's the strategy and what's in it, we're talking about how fast we can implement it. I like where that conversation is. I'm okay with that because that's the mindset that we wake up with every day at the department, and I know partners do, and I appreciate the increased awareness, and now there's a sense of urgency that is building. I want to turn that urgency into more action, and I think we're in a good position to do that because we've been thinking about how do we scale up and how do we accelerate. But I believe we will see the progress because we've done it in the past. And this goes way beyond my time at the department, but I'm talking about soil commissioners, and I'm talking about SCS, NRCS work. I'm talking about all the work that's been done through the years to get us to a place where we can see when you have a strategy, when you have a concerted effort, when you bring real resources to work, when you work with partners, you can actually see the implementation on the ground. And it's because of that past experience that I believe that we can do exactly the same thing. We just need to bring the same strategy and try to work to scale up. So it is based on past success that I think we will see success into the future, and really driving home that idea that we want to convert this urgency and awareness into action.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we've built, over the last couple of years, we've built a great foundation, right? We've developed a watershed approach that delivers things in a much quicker way. We have a great ecosphere of partners that we're always willing to add to. We have some dedicated funding that allows us to think a little bit more outside the box. But that urgency is driving us to do this at a faster pace. So if you were to leave this group in here with what needs to happen or how they can be helpful, because we're all in this collectively, what would be the 3 to 5 things that we could take our marching orders and go to our respective groups to help get this done?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you so much. I mean, I just appreciate the conversation that we've had, and today, but in other days as well, and really the mindset of thinking about how do you partner in ways, and this is sort of the way that I talk about this. We've got to partner in ways partner with people we've never partnered with before. We need to partner in ways that do things that we've never done before, and we have to do this at a scale that we've never done before. That's a whole lot of things we haven't done before. And it requires, I think, a collective effort to again have a bias towards action, a bias towards getting things done. And so I think what it requires to do that is, turn the page on maybe the way some of this has been framed in the past, blame game or division. I think let's put that behind us. Let's think about how we do these things together, working upstream and downstream, point and non-point, urban and rural. And that's how when we see this as a collective, when we see this as something that's an Iowa issue that we can work on together, I really think that mentality is what we really need to bring. And I see that with so many of our partners. Be creative. We have the ability at the state to be able to do a lot of things, to leverage our dollars, leverage our resources. We need help. We need creativity. We need innovation in the practices that we're using, in how we're delivering those practices, how we're helping to finance those practices. The door's open on all of those pieces as well. And then just this mindset of we need more partners, more boots on the ground, more outreach, more effort behind reaching further to implement. We know what to do. The practices are out there. The approaches are there. We largely there. We can always learn more. But we know what to go do. We're not wondering about that. We need to just go do more of it. So I would just encourage you to think about partnering, showing up with partners, partnering together, getting creative, and let's continue to focus on getting things done.
Great. Well, Secretary Nag, we really appreciate you being here today. We appreciate the department's work on all of this. We have just a few minutes. So we've done pretty well.
Yes. I'm a little surprised. I thought that thing would be flashing red before you and I would be done.
So we have just a few minutes, and I just want to give you the opportunity for any last things that you'd like to say to the group.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our partners, right? We're always talking about what next, a note of encouragement, an invitation to join, but man, we've had people that have stepped up, and I really do, just even a few years ago to think about some of the things that we're doing today. Great collaboration with Polk County, with Central Iowa Waterworks. The famous collaboration with Cedar Rapids and Lynn County up in the Cedar Valley, one that we use as an example, as a model of how things can be done in a way that's collaborative. I mean, I want to make sure that we're thanking those who were early folks to engage, and it is because of you all, it's because of that partnership that we're able to be where we are today. I want to thank my team. I've got a fantastic team. We've got, I see a few of them sitting in the room. I won't call them out because I know they'd be mad at me, but Susan and her team do a fantastic job of being creative, slamming into those barriers. It's hard work. It's hard work. And I just want to express my appreciation to them. Soil and water conservation districts, the historical roots of conservation in this state, our commissioners across the state. This stuff doesn't happen accidentally. There are hundreds of people who have gotten up today and are going about the work of getting conservation done on the ground. And they deserve a lot of thanks and a lot of praise and credit. And then all the partners who have come to the table in real ways. I am so thankful for that. And you know, it's just, I'll say what I always say in a conservation conversation: great job, let's do more. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And thank you guys for being here. And let's go do some more work.
Sounds good.